This is the Paiyon P4 bookshelf loudspeaker. And the price situation is a little bit interesting because on one hand, you can buy it directly from China for just a hair over $200 plus shipping and importation fees. But if you're in the United States, then you have the option of buying it off Amazon as well for the price of $330 a pair shipped. Now, what I want to do in this video is I want to talk about how something that's both designed and manufactured in China competes against gear that's designed elsewhere but manufactured in the same country. So yeah, let's roll the intro.
We missed the final call.
Alright, so I'm going to open up this review a little bit differently because, quite frankly, I don't have any information to share with you all about this company, nor do I really know what the design goals were with this product. Instead, I want to kick things off by focusing on why I even accepted these for review, because normally this isn't the kind of product that I would say yes to, but I said yes to it because it checked off 3 boxes. Number one, I was approached by a company that's been around for over 10 years. In fact, it's a company that I've kept my eye on for a very long time. It's China Hi-Fi. They have a whole bunch of products from there. And I noticed that, not only have they been around for a while, but the product lines that they represent have been around for over a decade. So it seems like they're very serious about representing products that are good, that have an interest in remaining in the business, not like a fly-by-night company. Okay, that was number one. Number two is this company started importing their goods into the United States and they're selling off Amazon. That means local support, at least for people in my country, and that's a big thing, number two. And then number three, I noticed that this seems to be a unique design in the sense that, to my knowledge, it's not an exact copy or clone of anything. It's its own design. And to me, all three of those things mean, all right, it's worth checking out, especially given the price point. So now let's take a look at what you get. This is going to be very short. So first and foremost, you get this beautiful, I don't know if it's a wood veneer or if it's a laminate, but either way, it's an absolutely gorgeous looking speaker. Now, in a dark room like this, it takes on kind of more of a dark tone, but in a bright room and or outdoors, it takes on this almost brilliant hue. It's really, really nice. Anyways, on top here, we're going to have a 1-inch soft dome tweeter. On the bottom, we're going to have a 6.5-inch polypropylene, I'm guessing, woofer. This is going to be a 2-way rear ported design. On the back, we're going to have a simple set of 5-way binding posts. We have our port, and that's all there is to it. So now, let's talk about how it sounds. Okay, so when it comes to performance, I think there's 2 questions that most people want to know. One, are these more than just a pretty face? And then number 2, can they hold a candle to the rest of the speakers at this price point? And I think the answer to both questions is yeah, they can. In fact, if you connect them to properly high-end components and you feed a good recording through the system like jazz or classical or acoustic, I think many of you would be shocked by how good these speakers can be. I mean, they really and truly give you the kind of performance that you would expect from speakers that cost anywhere between $1,000 to $2,000. That's how good they are. In fact, the only thing keeping this from being an outright rave review is the fact that there are some quirks to the sound, and it's those quirks that remind you of the fact that you're listening to a budget speaker. So I think the best way to unpack this is to just dive straight in and to go over its performance envelope with you guys, starting with the character. So if you're to bring home these speakers for yourself, what you're going to notice is a presentation that's definitely on the lively side of things, meaning there's going to be a V curve. The treble's going to be boosted a bit, the bass is going to be boosted a bit, the upper mid-range is going to be a little bit thin. And even though it's a lively sounding speaker, it doesn't project sound like, say, Klipsch or JBL, to where it sounds like the presentation is just taking place right there in front of your face. This is a little bit more of a laid-back sound. Most of the sound is taking place at the physical plane of the speakers and a little bit behind, but nonetheless, that's more or less what you can expect. So now, let's focus on the individual elements of the character. Starting with the treble. So the treble is interesting because the upper end of the treble is actually pretty smooth. It doesn't have that typical coarseness and sibilance of an affordable speaker, especially when listening to poor recording. So on one hand, it's actually pretty easy going, and on good recordings and on good equipment, you're going to get a proper high-end presentation that more or less reminds you of $1,000 plus loudspeakers. It's going to be well nuanced, well articulate. There's going to be good air and spaciousness to the top end. It's just really good. But the lower treble is actually going to be spiked up a bit, and that's what gives the speaker its lively character. Now, this is a bit of a give and a take, because on one hand, it makes details within the recording easier to discern, but on the other hand, not only does this deviate from neutrality, but when you listen to poor recordings that already are pretty messed up into treble, this can accentuate how messed up they are. So this is a bit of a give and take situation. Now let's move on to the mid-range. So right after that spike into treble, there's going to be an immediate dip within the mid-range. Now, this actually has some benefits, which I'll get to later, but overall, yes, the upper mid-range is thin. The rest of the mid-range is going to be pretty flat sounding. The sense of scale to the mid-range is very nice, especially for something at this price point. It reminds me a lot of ELAC, except unlike the ELAC, there's not as much warmth to the sound, and if anything, it's just a little bit clearer in the way that it does things. Now moving on to the bass. The bass is going to be relatively flat until you get to around, I would say, 120 hertz or so. Then there's going to be a nice boost. How much of a boost you experience just depends on your room and the gear that you use. But I actually like this just because it does help to give the sound a little bit of body and weight. Overall, the bass, I would say, is kind of in between something that's going for accuracy and something that's going for just raw output and strength. Now, I do feel like the bass is actually a little bit underrated with their specs. They have it dropping off at 50 hertz. I feel like it can dig all the way down into the low 40s, no problem whatsoever. So this speaker, it's not really about giving you lots of visceral bass so much as really good extension. Now let's move on to imaging. So like any two-way monitor, it images very well, but the real story here is going to be image depth. Right in between the speakers, you're going to get good center focus, and there's going to be layering to the soundstage. Now, this is somewhat unusual for a budget speaker, and it's just one of the things that makes this speaker special. So, and that's going to be one of the benefits of having that thin mid-range. It's kind of a voicing trick, but nonetheless, it's something that I think a lot of people would like. Dynamics are good. Look, it's a two-way monitor. It's not going to exactly wow you with explosive dynamics, but for what it is, it's pretty decent. When it comes to equipment matching, even though these speakers are rated at being 4 ohms, as long as you have a solid amp, they're pretty easy to drive. I mean, honestly, a 40 watt per channel amp or more in a medium to small size room should be fine. Now, when it comes to equipment matching in terms of voicing, I would say you don't want to go with something that's forward sounding or something that has a thin mid-range. That's going to be too much of the same thing going on. But if you have something that's neutrally voiced and or warm and rolled off sounding, you'll be good to go. And lastly, let's just focus on the music listening experience, because this is where things get kind of weird. Whoops, sorry about this awkward cut, guys. I accidentally left my phone on and I don't feel like refilming everything. So, getting to it, when it comes to the music, on one hand, these speakers are very good at handling a wide variety of music, whether it's rock and roll, classical, hip-hop, EDM, jazz, etc. However, what is not so consistent about them is the kind of recordings that they're going to sound good with. In fact, that actually leads me to some of the caveats about these speakers. Alright, so expanding on what I just said, when it comes to music, it's very difficult to predict what it's going to sound good with and what it won't sound good with. Now notice I didn't talk about the equipment just because when it comes to equipment matching, it's actually pretty straightforward. If you have thin and bright sounding gear, this isn't going to be a good match. But if you have fairly neutral and or warm and rolled off sounding gear, then yeah, you'll be good to go. And these speakers are also very easy to work with in a room. So instead, it all boils down to music, because on some recordings it sounds so amazing that it's like, man, these speakers for this kind of money, that's great. But then on other recordings, it just makes you want to turn your stereo system off. And I found no consistency. I mean, even on bad recordings from the likes of Incubus or Killswitch Engage or Linkin Park, they sound great. But if I throw on Radiohead, it just sounds bright and thin and just not very pleasant at all. So it's just something you're going to have to try in your own music to see where you land. Personally, I think if the upper mid-range was warmer, this would eliminate a lot of those issues and you just get a more consistently pleasant listening experience, but, you know, that's just me. I think the last thing that I want to mention here is the elephant in the room, which is this is an unknown brand out of China. Who knows how long they're going to be in business, right? I mean, they can be in business for 10 plus years. They can go out of business tomorrow. The only saving grace is that when it comes to loudspeakers, serviceability isn't necessarily a concern, especially at this price, just because everything is so simple. And unless you abuse the speaker, the only thing that you're going to have to worry about over the long haul is the crossover. All the parts, are very generic. So in 15 or so years, when it comes time to service it, it'll be cheap, it'll be easy to do, and then you can enjoy them for another 15 years. But still, I realize it's going to turn some people off. That's okay. That's why there's other options. Anyways, that of course leads me to my final thoughts. So I'm going to wrap up this review by stating the obvious. There are so many good, affordable loudspeakers at and below $500 right now that is almost mind-boggling. It's gotten to the point to where it's hard to find something that isn't good. And when it comes to the P4s, they hold up very well to the competition. In fact, I don't mind saying that of everything that I've experienced so far in and around that price point, these have the highest performance ceiling. Meaning that most affordable products, when it comes to pairing them up to electronics at retail for like $1,000 or more, that's when they hit the brick wall. That's where it just doesn't make sense to spend more money on the gear. Usually the speakers become the weak link, and that's what you need to upgrade. With these speakers, you can get away with components at retail for $2,000 each and still not feel like these are the weak link. That's how good they can be. But there's quirks to the sound. As mentioned earlier in this review, they have unique voicing. It's either going to work with some forms of music or it won't with other forms of music. So this is going to be for somebody who says, hey, look, I want a bookshelf speaker. I want something with good scale, and I'm prepared to take the good with the bad. I'm prepared to take a few chances because I love the look. I love the description of the sound, and I want to see if they work for me. If that's you, then I definitely think it's worth taking them for a spin. Now, at the end of this video, I'm going to have some comparisons between these speakers and some other stuff that I have in-house. So stick around for that if you want. If you don't, then thanks for watching, and until next time, peace. Okay, so this is embarrassing to admit, but after I filmed this entire review, I finally listened to these speakers with the grills on, and I gotta say, in my opinion, they sound best with the grills in place. It helps to tame down that top end a little bit, and what you're left with is overall an even more impressive presentation. So, with that being said, now let's move on to the comparisons. Alright, so first up is going to be the Paiyon P4 against the PSB Alpha P5s. That's way too many Ps. Now, instead of going over boring things like specs, we're just going to get straight into the comparisons, starting with the fact that, as you can see, the P4s are the larger of the two speakers. In fact, I gotta say that this impacts the out-of-box experience just because it's nice to receive something for this kind of money in a big box that's over 40 pounds. You take the product out and you're greeted with this nice wood or vinyl wrap or whatever it is. I just feel like the Paiyon P4s communicate more of a high-end experience. Not to take anything away from the PSBs though. I mean, they look good, but they come in this little box. They're very lightweight speakers, and they just don't have the wow factor of the P4s. But beyond that, let's talk about the sound. So, when it comes to the performance of these two speakers, I would say that they're going to be very different from one another. The P4s are going to be more that lively sounding speaker. They're definitely going to be more tilted up along the top end. They have a larger sense of scale, as you would expect from something of this size. The bass is going to be a lot stronger and digs a lot deeper than the Alphas, but the Alphas have some strengths too. So by comparison, they're a little bit more laid back, meaning that you can play a wider variety of music through these speakers and hook them up to a wider variety of gear and get more of a consistently pleasant listening experience, whereas these are going to be more revealing. They're going to be less forgiving of poor recordings, whereas these speakers are going to be a lot more easy to listen to. Next, let's move on to the mid-range. So the mid-range, the sense of scale, obviously is going to be larger. You're also going to notice that the mid-range on these speakers, I'd say, is going to be just a little bit more, for lack of a better word, nuanced. It can reveal subtle information in a way that's easier to discern. Whereas when it comes to the Alphas, I would say that the tone of the Alphas is very, very beguiling. In fact, I would even go so far as to say that the tone is more accurate on the PSBs, but it just doesn't play with the same sense of scale. Moving on to the bass is going to be a little bit quicker and cleaner on the Alphas, but obviously, as I mentioned before, the P5s are going to be able to dig, or the P4s, excuse me, are going to be able to dig a lot deeper and hit a lot harder. They're also going to be the more dynamic of the two. When it comes to imaging, both image very well. I would say that the Paions have the advantage of having that centered soundstage that has layers upon layers within that soundstage. The Alphas aren't bad in that regard, but they just don't quite stack up to the Paions. Now, one of the biggest strengths of the PSB is there's too many Ps. Is going to be the driver integration. So the driver integration is going to be sublime. Some of the best I've experienced for an affordable product. I mean, it's clear that a lot of time and research went into the development of these speakers. The driver integration here is okay, but really and truly you need to experience them with the grills on in order to get the best driver integration, whereas with these, you don't need to put the grills on in order to get an easygoing, very balanced sounding presentation. Ultimately, they're different speakers for different people. The Payons is going to be more that cliched high-end experience. It's less forgiving, but it can also be a lot more revealing and rewarding on good situations, whereas the Alphas are going to be more consistently pleasant across a wider variety of listening situations. And also the PSBs are going to be a lot better in a near-field environment, whereas these speakers need at least 5 or more feet between you and the speakers in order to sound their best. Anyways, guys, that's it, and now let's move on to the next comparison. Alright, so lastly, let's compare the Payons to the Klipsch RP600Ms, which I admit isn't exactly a fair fight just because these speakers retail for almost double the price of the Payons, at least when you factor in Amazon pricing. So, this is more or less how they stack up. The Payons is going to be, believe it or not, the slightly more forward sounding speaker, at least when you listen to them both pointed straight out into your room and with the grills on. The Payons are going to be just a little bit more expressive. They're going to be a little bit better at extracting subtle information than the Klipsch. I would say they're going to be just a little bit more tonally accurate by direct comparison, whereas the Klipsch, I can't believe I'm saying this, they're going to be a little bit smoother sounding than the Payons in that regard. The sense of scale is actually going to be very similar between the two. The mid-range is actually going to be more similar than different. I would say that the Klipsch has a little bit more of a warmer tone, whereas the Payons is going to be a little quicker, a little bit more nuanced sounding. The bass is going to be stronger on the Payons than on the Klipsch. The Klipsch, you know, they do roll off a little bit early, and I would say it takes on a little bit of a warmer tone. Not to say that the Payons do not have a warmer tone, but yeah, they're going to dig deeper, they're going to hit a little bit harder, and they're going to be, believe it or not, just a little bit more dynamic than the Klipsch. Now, when it comes to imaging, I would say that the imaging on the Payons is going to be better in the sense that it'll lay down a wider soundstage, but also at the same time have that nice focus in between speakers. And again, it has that depth. The Klipsch doesn't necessarily have the same amount of depth. It doesn't image with the same kind of width. But on the other hand, there's also going to be really good focus in between the Klipsch speakers, and you don't really have to work hard to get it. Now, ultimately, I would say that this is an interesting comparison just because the Klipsch speakers are a little less discriminating about what they'll sound good with, whereas the Payons are going to be just a little bit more revealing in that sense. So I feel like the Klipsch is going to be the easier recommendation for a lot of people just because I know that it's going to be consistently good across a wider variety of situations than the Payons. But ultimately, yeah, the Payons hold up very, very well, which is an accreditation for something at this price competing against what is now the sweetheart of the budget world. But both products, obviously, really, really good for what they are. And yeah, that's it from me, guys. So as always, thanks for watching, and until next time, peace.